Well, hello everyone and welcome. I'm Hannah Wilcox. I'm the Head of Customer Experience at Conversity. Thanks very much for joining us today. So today's session is going to cover the paradigm shift that we think is needed within e-commerce and some of the strategies and skills that are needed in this new environment, particularly given the hyper-competitive marketplace that we're in as of today. So just to cover a couple of the topics that we're going to be covering today, the state of e-commerce and the growing gap between the traffic growth and conversion growth, how we can potentially drive more conversion from the traffic that we're seeing. And I think there's a really interesting thought here as well on the key concept of product, how product is changing and why product is no longer just the product. And then really what the final section will just be on what this paradigm shift really means. So what does it mean to be a 97% thinker rather than a 3% thinker? So before we go ahead, just a couple of things about housekeeping. So we are recording the session and we'll be sending a copy around later for anyone who's on the webinar or anyone who couldn't make it. We do really want to hear from you. So please pop your thoughts, questions, comments in the QA box, and we'll do our best to get to the QAs at the end of the session. So joining me today is Colin Lewis, who's a strategic marketeer and columnist at Marketing Week. Vinny O'Brien, who is the founder of Vinny & Co, and Brad from Conversity, the Chief Customer Officer. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thanks, Hannah.
Hello.
So before we dive into the content, Vinny, would you like to introduce yourself and just tell us a bit about your background?
Sure, Hannah. Thank you. I'm Vinny O'Brien. I'm founder of Vinny & Co e-commerce consultancy agency and the e-commerce summit, which was held here in Kerry. 2019, I am the director of e-commerce in a tent company. We sell thermally insulated tents into the US market called Crua. And I work quite closely with Colin. I've been in the industry for about 15 years.
Great. Okay, cool. Thank you. Brad, over to you. For those people who haven't heard about Conversity, could you tell us a bit of background, please?
Absolutely. So Brad Christian here, and Conversity exists to bridge the gap between retailers and brands and the consumers that they court. You know, competition is fierce and innovation is moving at a pace not like we've never seen before. And so we're a business that's all about creating personalization between those companies and the consumers that they're seeking to work with. And our solution is about software as a service deploying for the purpose of making that connection, the connection between the brand and the consumer, and ultimately the consumer and the product and the service that they're looking to acquire. And we're delighted to be a part of the conversation. So thank you. Great.
And over to you, Colin. Can you tell us a little bit about your background as well, please?
Hi, everybody. I'm Colin. I'm a professional marketer with over 25 years experience. I ran my first e-commerce website in 2006, turning over about 100 million. But in the last 10 years or so, I've done a lot around teaching and doing workshops with major brands around e-commerce. And most recently finished the e-commerce best practice book for e-consultancy and the e-commerce marketplace report coming out next week. I'm also the founder of the largest marketing conference in Ireland, DMX Dublin, and I'm a writer for Marketing Week for the last 5 or 6 years as well.
Great. Thanks, Colin. Thanks very much. And just by way of introduction, I'm the Head of Customer Experience at Conversity. Have come from a very brand-led background, so previously worked at Unilever, and then for the last 11 years before being in Conversity, I worked at John Lewis. So lots of experience of retail, e-commerce and brands. So just to kick us off, Brad, can you tell us what you're seeing in e-commerce right now?
Absolutely. So I don't think it's going to surprise anyone in our audience that traffic to e-commerce sites is growing. And in fact, the creativity the different companies are using to attract new traffic is obvious, and everything we've gone through here recently is driving that. This information that we're showing on the screen right now from Adobe Analytics, you know, what was interesting to us is that obviously traffic's going up. Average order value is also increasing at a similar pace, but what isn't growing at a similar rate is online conversion rate. So, people like Colin and Vinny are on this session to really help companies understand how do we get more of our fair share of online conversion. People are coming online and there's different modalities that are being used to bring them there, but how can you optimize your traffic in a way that generates more and better revenue? That's really what this insight is about from our perspective.
And so over to you really, Vinny. I mean, what's your take on this? What changes are you seeing in how consumers are using online?
So there's a couple of things just to pick up on what Brad has said. Like the traffic is definitely coming up, but what we're not necessarily seeing is the same sources for that traffic. And I think this comes down to the first kind of instance I'm going to pay to the 3% versus 97% mentality. And we'll break that down a little bit further. But those brands that are now surfacing in social are they're being found in a very different way. So this idea of discovery is becoming more and more important. And I think we've got two very different behaviors that are now surfacing, which is discovery at its core in social, so TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, all the usual places that we'd expect them, and they've been bolted on to the traditional search channels that we have seen. We've also got new retail media entrants into the market as well, who are now saying we can provide this great source of traffic. We see it through places like Amazon growing exponentially in that space, but we're now seeing it creeping into places like your old employer, Hannah, John Lewis, are going to start monetizing that traffic as well. So the places that people are discovering brands is becoming really vast. And I think Colin's going to touch on in a little while. The way you can start tapping into this is by looking at your channel profile and start identifying where your customers are. And then you've got to start appearing there and doing something about it. And I think that's the first step in being a 97% thinker. You are customer first, and you focus on that customer experience. And I think that's a really important part. It means your proposition has fundamentally got to change. And I think, Colin, that's probably something you're seeing quite a lot of through the product side of things.
Well, it's an interesting point, Vinny, there, because we have this kind of idea of products as a thing. I lift up my iPhone and I see it as a thing, and it's kind of hard and it's in my hand and it looks like a thing, okay? But actually the meaning and concept of product is changing. It's no longer just the thing that's in my hand. And we still have this legacy of where, folks like ourselves and all of us, we'd go into a supermarket or into a store, whatever, we'd pick up the thing and it would be the solid item in our hand. But actually the whole meaning, the whole idea of what product is this mixture now. And, I describe it as the concept of product is changing. It's not just the physical item that I have in my hand. It's much more encapsulating. It's the technology. It's the product that drives the marketing. It's how you see the product online. I'll show you an example of that actually now, and how you interact with it. And so what's happening is we've got this kind of backward thinking. We're looking backwards on how products used to be seen, and we haven't made the leap forward into how products are now seen by the user, because the users are now looking at products on a screen that's maybe a couple of centimeters wide by a couple of centimeters long, which is vastly different to where we've come from over the last couple of 100 years. And therefore it brings in this concept of what I call winning on the digital shelf. And it really, if I was going to give you the second of our takeaways, besides the idea of discovery and the concept of product is changing, is the notion of the digital shelf. So we know the real shelf, or not even the real shelf, the shelf in the store, it is a limited range. It has, I can pick it up, I can hold the thing, and I've got, I've got rows, I've got categories, and so on. But actually, the digital shelf is essentially unlimited. And so therefore that causes a problem for our consumer who, that's why we're seeing the traffic go up, but conversions stay the same or go down, because discovery, as Vinny says, is an issue because we've got a much wider range of assortment and a much wider range of availability. And customers are taking cues such as ratings and reviews to make a decision, whereas how they used to take their cues was from picking up the product, looking at the ingredients, going, that looks okay. And so therefore that means the product content that we have, whether it's on a marketplace or on an e-commerce site, is super important. I've just spent a very long time writing this marketplace report, and I'd say maybe 10 pages alone are around creating the right content for your marketplace and creating the right content for your e-commerce site. And kind of lastly, availability is important, but really the next kind of phase particularly is around where we've got our products, we might distribute them directly D2C through our own website, but now we're introducing this world of how the retailers, so Tesco.com or Sainsbury's.com or JohnLewis.com, how they are taking our products and displaying them, and how Amazon is taking our products and displaying them, and how eBay are taking our products and displaying them. So suddenly we've got this worldview that has to change, that our digital shelf is infinite and if you will, curated by these brands such as Tesco and so on. So we actually have to have 3 or 4 different mindsets to win on the digital shelf. And I'll just give you a couple of things that are happening on this. For example, with images. I never really thought through images myself that much, but if we look at, this is actual research from Unilever here, whereby if we look on the left-hand side, we see the Magnum bar and, visual, I should say. And we're looking at this, I'm sure everybody's looking at this and going, wow, that looks so clear to me, I know what it is. But actually, when they pulled out the actual bars, the actual ice cream bars, and improved the branding and made a clearer sub-range, their conversion rate improved by 24%. Mm-hmm. But we'll also see on the right-hand side, you see how that visual looks on screen. It's tiny. It's barely even a centimeter wide. But we're still coming from this legacy perspective of how things used to be. So even a simple thing about the digital shelf is, and the fact that the concept of product is changing, is our images have to work really, really hard. And I talked about, I touched on ratings and reviews as being the digital shelf, but the ratings reviews, again, they're moving on. And one of the things I always recommend everybody in e-commerce is look at the cutting edge folks, look at the beauty folks and the clothing folks, because they're really at the cutting edge in e-commerce. And if you take, say, what Glossier are doing, they're taking these ratings and reviews and turning them into little mini high impact movies. They're taking testimonials and bringing it and surfacing it right in front of customers by looking at the front of their site. So people doing these simple, clever things that instead of having things buried, as I've heard from some of the major clients that I work with, buried on websites, they're taking them and surfacing them. And related to that then is how we think about content as well. So we're taking we can take ratings of views and make them content, but then actually there's this wider view. And again, the beauty folks like Glossier, they're taking content, customers and e-commerce and just mixing them as this big mesh. You'll see what they say, this entirely new kind of beauty brand, one that owns the distribution channel, that connects directly with the customers, drives inspiration, which is another word for discovery, and content all in one big mesh. I think it's really fascinating. And I always encourage people to say, don't look in your home market, look at what some of these big beauty brands are doing in Asia and doing in the US, and you'll really get inspired. So that's what's happening in e-commerce. But what about the comms? Do you want me to talk about the comms there, Hannah, to kind of say how?
I think, what does all this mean really for how you communicate to consumers?
So 2 phrases there, content and commerce and context. But I want to have one rule, by the way, before we just wrap up on that point, before we talk about planning your communications. And there's a rule from a book by Alistair Campbell, a former PR advisor to the Tony Blair government in the UK. And he says, just when the communicator is getting bored with saying something, that's when there's an outer chance of it reaching the outer radar of public opinion. And so one of the things I always go and say, now, I know we're talking about e-commerce. I know we're talking about content. I know we're talking about some cool stuff here. But part of the reason is people keep changing their message, changing their content and moving it around. Nobody, I guarantee you this, nobody is lying awake at night thinking of your brand. Nobody at all. So you need to be consistent all the time rather than hopping around and continually changing all your content all the time. Which leads me to my sort of wrap-up point. When you plan up your communications, you have to think in terms of 3 C's. The channel, the context, and the content, which is, ties back to my original point of the concept of product is changing. You don't just see the world as the channel, or you don't just see the world as the context. You don't see the world purely as the content. You think through the experience you need. You think to understanding what the target customer is doing, and then you put it all together to create the right message in the right place at the right time. So we've come through what's going on in the world product to let's turn this into something to plan your communications. So think of the 3 C's, channel, context, and content.
Just to jump in on that, Colin, I think that kind of leads nicely into one of the the key skills that we kind of have to learn, and it's one of those areas that we have to start trusting, which is discipline. So when you understand that brand concept and you want to be consistent in it, it takes discipline and trust that you've done the right research, diagnosed the problem right, and that you really understand your customers. And what it leads to is kind of going back to Brad's original point, that you don't focus so much on the week-to-week metrics, that you understand the trend that's going on in your business and how relative it is to your consistency. You talk a lot about marketing effectiveness, and that's fundamentally what it is. It's not a week-to-week or month-to-month set of activities or tactics. It's actually a coherent plan that's understood from the start to the finish. And I think as e-commerce people, because maybe we're in a team where we're managing up, or we're talking to peers, we look at week to week and month performance, and we determine that that's an objective or a relative view of how successful we are or not. And I think that forces our hand in the wrong way quite some time. So I think the ability to articulate this and to drill down on it and understand at a brand level why we exist is an important skill. And final point in that's why the beauty brands seem to get it really spot on. They understand from that core concept why they exist and why customers ultimately find them, not have to do this outreach and search.
Yeah, there's definitely some really good case studies out there from the beauty brands. Great, thanks for that. So coming back to you, Vinny, I know that there's going to be people on this call today who are fascinated to understand more about this 97 versus 3% thinking. Can you just tell us what you mean by that distinction?
So I'm pretty sure there's a guy on the call, he at least registered, Niall Waters, who had a coffee with me 2 Christmases ago, and he's working for a firm at the time, and he was trying to pitch to me the idea of 97 and 3%. So I'm going to credit Niall with the concept, but it really resonated with me that as a business, we were so focused on our 3% conversion rate as being kind of an industry standard. And we thought, once we can get by that or get over that hurdle, it's going to be good enough. But he challenged me and said, what about those 97% of people that just up and leave? And at the time, we're selling in the US market. We were listed on Walmart, we were listed on Amazon, all these other great places. And he said, what about the customer that's got, an Amazon Prime account who may want to use their free shipping, or they've got loyalty points that they want to redeem in Walmart? He said, you've got to start putting yourself in the mindset of your customer. And he broadened the discussion, and it got really interesting, because that 97% means that you're kind of fully customer centric. You don't really mind where that customer buys from you or where they experience your brand. You're giving them the option to do it. And the software worked where it allowed me in my shopping cart to send someone away from my shopping cart, which, it seems sacrilegious as an e-commerce, I suppose, enthusiast and practitioner. But actually, to be fully customer centric, you shouldn't really mind where that transaction occurs. And for the very reason that I've outlined just at the outset, which was, we don't necessarily know the motivation. We don't know the way that they found us. We don't know what method for delivery or what other motivations are going on in there. So by kind of taking that first step and being brand focused, I think we can start thinking like the 97%ers. Where I kind of go a little bit further than that, it's to try and take that marketing effectiveness and think through the customer proposition. And Brad, we've talked about this a few times. The Lego Finder and the Toys R Us site is the perfect combo of guiding a person from a point in a website right through to an endpoint of saying, here's the products that we've now curated based on your filtering. And the way it works, it encourages people to really have a look at it. It's on the Toys R Us Canada site. You can go into Lego, and the first question it says is, who are you buying for? Tell us their age, tell us the interest groups that they have, and all the way that you're going through it, it's tapping into you thinking about the choices that you're making. So it's really focusing on the marketing. The fact you're on Lego, it's a destination site, so you're already sold on it. But it's getting you to start consciously think about the questions that you're taking. And when I start thinking about sites now and the effectiveness of them, we don't ask enough questions on the way in. So this 3% is predicated on the fact that someone has gone to a search engine, they've chosen us by chance, generally. And we hope by chance that they're going to come in and purchase from us. Whereas the 97% goes back to understanding your brand and being present in a channel that someone can discover you. And when you think about that idea of discovery and broaden it out into a kind of wider context, there's already a connection there. If you find something yourself, you feel like you've done the hard work, and it's kind of a little bit more personal to you. And then if you find something that resonates with you, it allows you to ease your way through that search process a lot better. What I'm seeing as well through the clients I'm working with is there's a much greater ability to capture that affinity and turn it into a retention program, which is going to be really important as we move into 21, 22, where consolidation of the market is going to be really key. But
Vinny,
what do you think?
On that point, Vinny, the thing about retention, I think retention is obviously very valid, but there's a little bit of a trap hidden in the world of retention. And so if we look at marketing effectiveness, which we've been talking about, there's now 50 years of marketing science with data to prove it, numerous case studies to prove it, that to grow your business, you need to have what we'll call a target light buyers. Okay, a lot of marketing material you'll see out there in the world says, oh, loyalty, loyalty, loyalty. Okay, there's actually no data to back up the fact that loyalty will help grow your brand. Sure, you might get more money from your existing customer, but in fact, ultimately, because of what's called the leaky bucket, which is, customers fall off, they change, they move different things, they move house, they do different things. You always have to keep filling your bucket. And so that's why, Vinny, you're right about your point about the channels. The wider the funnel, the more you need brand salience. Brand salience is what drives light buyers. And whereas heavy buyers, if we take, say, people who are buying the product, say, once a month, whatever the case may be, there's only so much you can increase them. However, you can capture more light buyers, and light buyers essentially ultimately enter this funnel. That's why you've got your 97%, and ultimately we drive your 3%, which is where what we're doing is we're focusing on this 3%, whereas the 97% is the light buyers. That's where you need your focus, really. But Vinny, just why are people abandoning in the first place? What's going on? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's numerous reasons. I think it comes back to one of the things you said earlier about proposition. We tend to hide the things we don't want to challenge people's assumptions on, like shipping costs. Having to create an account is one of the areas. I worked with a sports company in the UK a number of years ago, and we found by taking that account creation must do and putting it as an add-on to the end to say add a password if you'd like to create an account, resulted in a 20% increase in conversion just by taking that simple action and moving something from being mandatory to being optional at the end of the funnel. Unsatisfactory returns policy is kind of a really interesting area, because we tend to design from the inside out when it comes to returns policies. Ultimately, as a consumer, all you want to do is get your money back. We need to solve for that first and let our policies and processes and procedures follow after that. Complicated checkout is one of those areas that's thankfully being eroded through technology. And Brad, we talked a little bit about it in a short while, but the idea of frictionless payment is something we hear a lot about, but that is improving all the time. We want to make it easy for people to like pre-fill addresses, pre-fill any data that we already have, which may get challenged, I think, in the next few months. And then looking down at the other two areas, slow and rigid delivery operations and lack of trust. And they're kind of they're interdependent, they're intermingled on each other. It goes back to your point earlier, Colin. The idea of having a strong proposition means that you measure your operational metrics. So let's take a couple of quick examples on this. Argos, as we know in the UK, you can order up to 6 p.m. and get same-day delivery in many respects. So they've taken an operational process that they have and an operational strength and turned it into a marketing hook for people, which is absolutely phenomenal. I love that. And then you look to the converse of that, the lack of trust. By not kind of putting certainty around your processes and letting customers know upfront the things you're good at and making them aware of the policies and the areas that you can shift them towards, you're making them ask a question that will in turn add to that lack of trust. And I think that's an important part. Finally, with that, you've got to shout about it. So if you start gathering reviews, be they product or website or service reviews, you've got to put them front and center so that people can go do their research and feel like it's going to be an important part of that decision-making process. The final point on those reviews is, if you take an action based on customer feedback, let them know you've taken that action. That will add to your long-term trust. And the likelihood is someone will tell a friend and they'll tell two friends and so on and so forth.
That's certainly something that resonates with me from my time at John Lewis. We used to spend a lot of time doing that. So I'm going to have to move us on, I'm afraid, in the interest of time. So Brad, back to you now. We did an e-commerce study earlier on this year. What were some of the key learnings that are relevant to this discussion?
So just staying on the track that Vinny started with this, personalization and optimizing your online conversion rate, we conducted that study that you just referenced, and we talked to 2,000 consumers across the globe. And we asked the question, what's the one innovation, what's the one improvement that a brand could make on its website that would give you more confidence to transact? And the number one issue or the number one innovation that was cited, and by almost 50% of our audience, was the ability to compare product features and benefits. 45% of our audience said that, followed by better search and filtering. The fourth most mentioned item was personalized offers and recommendations. And the sixth was help me choose guides or technology. And you might be wondering, well, okay, Brad, you went 1, 2, 4, 6. Why is that? Well, there was a reason. 4 of the top 6 things that consumers are suggesting are what they're looking for in e-commerce to have more confidence to buy are all elements of intelligent guided search or intelligent guided selling. And IGS, as my colleagues refer to it, is simply the ability to put, if you go to the next slide, Hannah, it's the ability to put a branded retail experience on your website so that you can ask dynamic questions of your consumers to understand their motivations, to understand their needs and their interests, and using consumer psychology best practices to ask those questions in a way that compel them. What's proprietary to Conversity is our recommendation engine, and it is the sophisticated machine learning logic that we use to basically facilitate these 4 key outcomes that are on the right-hand side of the slide. So first of all, IGS helps you build a more personal, more human connection with your customer. Second, it optimizes sales performance in that it creates better online conversion rate, and it does a better job of creating more authentic upsell. Third is this idea of educating your customers, teaching them the considerations they have to think through before they make the final purchase. And the last and fourth item here is increasingly relevant to the conversation we're having today about know who your customers are, make sure you understand your brand message. It's gaining strategic insight into what people think about you. Who buys what and why is a really powerful element. And so that's why, you heard Vinny talk about the Lego gift finder earlier. That's why Vinny's such a fan. When you have this sort of 97% thinking, intelligent guided search, intelligent guided selling becomes a really relevant optimization of your website. And Vinny, I know you want to talk about another one here as well.
Yeah, I think just to kind of touch on that point, Brad, you touched on the human aspect of IGS. It's like when you walk in the store and there's someone there to ask you, what can they help you with? And then you go to a specific counter and they can kind of guide you through that questioning process. And we're used to that every day of our life. It's naive to think that a consumer on the end of a website is not going through that same psychological process to say, I want to get to the point of least resistance as quickly as I can. And that's the difference, I guess, between browsing and that kind of in the moment shopper who kind of has already decided what it is they want to get to. And that's where your ability to move from 3% to 5% or 10% can be gained over time, is by putting yourself into that mindset. One of the other kind of areas that I see growing, and particularly in home and garden and lifestyle and furniture, that's really taking precedence, is this idea of augmented reality and virtual reality. And the product set that I've worked in, what we're seeing is people getting contextual reference. So you see the picture of the table there, you're getting the dimensions on that. You can pick it up and spin it around. You can put it over by the window to see, does it look good in my home? So not only are you helping on the conversion side, but you're reducing the likelihood that someone may return this. You get a sense of the colors in the context of the room. And as a conversion aid, I'm seeing this even jumping from, beyond websites, it's coming further up funnel. So I'm seeing a lot of people effectively using this in social media advertising, because it's so relevant in that middle of the funnel that, we can bring customers in greater numbers with that warm and the kind of the warm lead aspect coming straight through. And if you put it into context again, the D2C brands, the direct-to-consumer brands in the beauty space are among the most innovative that we can really look at right now. And the skincare finder that I've seen in action as well, and it was one of the first times I looked at guided search, was it was taking you through that process of saying, what type of skin do you have? How often do you use it? There was about 3 or 4 different questions, but it got you thinking about the use case. And what I loved about this, and it goes back to the point Colin was making about loyalty. I don't think loyalty exists per se, right? Sounds a bit dumb, but there's only one really strong loyalty program globally, which we all know, the P word, I won't say it, but it's there. But what they've done really well is they've added value add services into that particular one. But if I go back to the marketing of where I think we can gain retention and some loyalty, it's by getting into the time factor of marketing. So most of our products have a time limit, and the natural point for us to start selling again and start creating that retention flow is by paying attention to how people use our product relative to how it should be. And my wife, and I will stop talking after this point, she worked in the skincare business for a long time, and she used to sell a $300 tub of moisturizer, and I could never understand that people bought it. But she said, if you use this properly, the way it's supposed to be, if you apply it properly with the right amount, that's a 6-month supply. So to use it properly, you spend 3 cents a day. There was a use case, but it's that idea of breaking it down and articulating into those bite-sized chunks, and then you use your content marketing to do that education process between purchases. And I think that's an important aspect.
Yeah, great, thank you. So just moving us on, Brad, what's your take on conversion rate optimization? What else have we done in our research?
One of the things that came up was this idea that 43.4% of customers suggested that discounts and coupons would be relevant, and discounting is great until it's not. And what I mean by that is that if you give everybody a discount, you've left money on the table, right? And so one of the things that we've been doing with our guided selling technology is looking for ways to even optimize the journey further still. And so this notion that there are some people that are looking for discounts, sort of weighed on us. And so we've discovered some technology on the following slide that's about negotiation technology. So you're moving through the journey, you're answering the questions, because you've got to focus on getting a recommendation, but you get to that recommendation and maybe you pause. Maybe you're not sure that's the right item. And then this bot pops up and offers you an opportunity to get that item less expensively if you're willing to haggle, willing to negotiate. And we're seeing there's a material impact to the people who like to negotiate, to build that personal connection with the brand. Oh, wasn't that clever? Wasn't that fun? And 30% of the conversations that follow this track do actually reach an agreed deal where they get that discount. It's not for everybody. Not every customer wants to negotiate, but the ones that like that really love that and wind up being, much more connected to that brand, and they get what they're looking for at a discount. So, we look at it as a win-win and an enhancement to our guided selling customer journey technology.
Okay, great. I mean, we've covered so much content around e-commerce and how it's changing. My final question really is to you, Vinny. So clearly e-commerce is evolving and there's new strategies and tactics that are being used. What does that mean for the skills, mindsets and types of people that you might need these days in an e-commerce team?
You kind of have to wear many hats on any one day. So adopting a role is going to be varied, whatever way you look at it. But we're trying to break this down into some sort of, I suppose, relevant takeaways for people. And if you look through these, the skills that you require to manage all of this go back to some of the points that Colin made earlier. If you look at something like content, product, and stock and inventory management, take a very simple approach. If we start thinking as though we're consumers, we can start making better choices as people in e-commerce, because we start thinking not as our work selves, we actually start thinking about the practical use cases. Things like merchandising. If it's raining outside and you own a store, you're going to bring the umbrellas to the front of the store. There's this great concept of taking that digital walk through the store to manage your content, make sure that your site's up to speed on the morning. And Colin, we've talked a lot about these roles and what they actually mean within business. I think there's a lot more fluidity between teams outside of specialist roles.
The world is looking for skills, okay, but we still keep advertising roles. And the people kind of can be what I call T-shaped, and I would encourage everybody listening to this call to go and say, stop thinking about the role. Look for people who've got T-shaped. In other words, they've got a wide variety of skills here, but they've got expertise in a couple of areas. So I'll be completely selfish in this context here, because not only can I do marketing, but I can write and I can do content, but I can also look at product and make it and see how does that work visually as well. So that's really what you're looking for. It's not like you're looking for unicorns. You're just looking for people who've got in-depth skills in a number of 3 or 4 areas here. Everybody can be good at a lot of things, and that's cool. You want that, but what you want is somebody with a skill in 2 or 3 areas. And if I really want to kind of wrap up on this point here, which is stop looking for unicorns. Stop looking for people who essentially are a mix of Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and have 20 years experience on a technology that's only 2 years old. Stop all that crap. Okay, just do can I get this person has 1 skill? If they have 1 skill, they can learn 2 skills and 3 skills. You're hiring for attitude. Unfortunately, people are hiring, they just take attitude out of the picture, which is just nuts. So I want to wrap up on that particular haranguing point, because it's a real bugbear for me.
And paraphrase, unicorns don't exist.
Yeah.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I know you've done further work on this, so I'm sure that people will be able to tap into that for more detail if they're looking for it. So thank you to all of you. It was a really fascinating talk on e-commerce, some of the strategies and tactics that we could use, how things were evolving. I hope everybody on the call today got what they wanted out of it. Thank you very much for being with us. We've got a short amount of time now where we are going to go to a few questions. So if you bear with me a second, I will just have a look at what questions we've got coming in. So I've got a question here for Colin. Is the current traffic growth sustainable in your view?
Yep. I'm going to quote Ben Evans in this. He basically has this phrase. He says, people think we're at the beginning of the end, whereas actually we're just at the end of the beginning. The pandemic was the end of the beginning of the first phase of e-commerce. Now we're getting on to the second phase of e-commerce. No different to the web has gone into 3 different phases. There was the web of the 1990s, then there was the web of social from 2005, 2004 onwards, and now there's web 3.0 happening. E-commerce has barely started. It's part of the pandemic, it wasn't even 15% of gross retail sales in the US. Now it's up to 20, 25%. Is it going to 100%? Of course not. It's this mix, this omnichannel mix, what's going to happen. So we have barely started, folks. Think about all the people in Africa and Asia and India, whatever, who are just coming online with 4G phones. Yeah. And of course, once we all have our vaccines, we're all going to have 5G automatically installed in us anyway. So
yeah, I mean, even Europe's not quite as advanced as us in many areas in terms of online usage. So yeah,
so barely started.
Yeah, okay, cool. A question that's come through here, I think I'll throw this one to you, Vinny, but please do chip in, Colin and Brad. Are technologies like Apple Pay driving cart retention? How significantly has it made a difference? Do you see it growing?
Not necessarily Apple Pay by itself, but certainly what I've seen is the more options you can offer at cart level, the better in terms of payment for people, because we don't necessarily know what particular wallet they want to use in any one day, or it can be quite foolish to try and second guess that. So I think more options, the better when it comes to cart stage. Colin, anything to add?
You've done a very good job of this. Is actually KLM have done an excellent job. Because the airlines have really thought through this a lot, because they've got clients from all over the world, and they're in countries that do not have credit cards, and so they've really looked at this. So I would encourage everybody here to go and make a fake KLM booking and see how many payment options come up. I think they've up to 12 at this stage, because what they do in Kenya is very difficult to what they do in Singapore, which is very difficult to what they do in Beijing and obviously Amsterdam. So just for everybody here, the whole world does not have credit cards. Very few people actually have credit cards.
Yeah, certainly one of the key customer experience principles at John Lewis was make it easy for your customers and design things the way that they want them to be. Don't ever force somebody down one route, because not everybody's going to want that same route. So another question here for Vinny. What CRO tools should I use to improve our site experience? Conversion rate optimization tools, sorry.
There are a number, I guess. Some of the basic ones that I'd start with are things like Hotjar, which is like a screen mirroring software which records every transaction going through your site, so you can actually see how people interact. I mention that particularly because as we move through privacy changes, actually looking at those interactions and taking the time to sit down and calibrate them and see what were those outliers from my normal metrics can be really, really useful. Tools for A/B testing, things like Optimizely, Yieldify, all these tools can be really, really useful in terms of testing, you know, is a percentage off or a money back offer the better thing for your particular customers? Testing different messaging during the day with different message bots, and there are tons and tons of them. So for example, I would test, you know, maybe discount offers in quiet periods in the morning where you don't convert, or where you see high abandoned cart rates at particular times in the evening, using bots to drive particular offers in certain pages at those times. And there are numerous tools in that space. And of course, like I've used the Conversity platform in a number of areas. And I like that because it's taking us down to the nuts and bolts of what are the decisions that consumers are trying to make as they go through that journey. In skincare, I just found it so useful to aid in conversion.
Great, thanks, Vinny. And just in the final 1 minute, Brad, I'm going to throw one question at you for a quick answer. Where on a brand or retailer's website should an intelligent guided selling tool go?
Oh, good question. So it's interesting. It depends on the customer or the client. It depends on the brand. We've got companies that literally it is the homepage. You land on the homepage and the customer journey begins right then and there. We've got other cases where it may be as part of a category that particular company is promoting. So they may sell multiple categories and they want to give you some particular help in a category. And then lastly, we've seen some companies that will just have a help me choose button on the far right-hand side of the screen or at the top of the screen, just saying, look, if you're anywhere on our website and you need help picking something, picking the product, picking the service, you can click right here and we'll guide you through that. And Hannah, I'm not sure if you can see it here, but there's another question. I don't know if we have time. It says you talked about the digital shelf and images have to work hard. So maybe this is you, Colin, but how do you see this shelf for a company that delivers services such as a telecom?
Actually, the answer is still the same. Remember, I said product is getting mixed up with propositions, getting mixed up with this. So the product or the service or the content. What has to work hard in that context? The imagery still has to work hard, but most of all in that context, your copywriting has to be world class to make that work. So, you know, where we might go and say the product pictures have to work hard in the product side, your words have to work very hard. So that's why I say one of the great careers in the future is to be a great writer.
Yeah. Great. I think we are literally to the wire. We've got 1 minute left. So with that in mind, bear with me. I'm just going to move on. Oh, there we go. So just to say a massive thank you to Colin, Vinny and Brad for covering all that content today. If there are any further questions, or if you want to reach out to each of these, any of our speakers today individually, please feel free to do so. Their email addresses are on the screen here. And so it really just leaves me to say thank you. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for attending. I do hope you found that useful. We will be sending out the recording of the webinar today and get back to anyone with questions that we didn't have a chance to cover today. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye all. Thank you.